Good evening, everyone. We are starting with our 5th episode of ArchiDesign Talks in the spring semester 2022. Today's guest is Samir Nicolas SADDI, and he is going to present us his presentation with the title New Approaches in Museum Design and Scenography. And Maan Hocam, Maan Chibli will be our moderator today. So I'm leaving the word to you, Maan Hocam. Please.
Okay. Thank you so much. Hello, Samir. Welcome in our Archi talk.
Thank you.
I'll make a short introduction presenting you. So Samir Nicolas SADDI is a Canadian-Lebanese architect. He's an architect, photographer, and researcher with over than 45 years experience in international projects. As an architect, he manages cultural landmarks, iconic buildings such as the Museum of Islamic Art in Qatar with Pei and Wilmot, the Louvre Abu Dhabi with the Atelier Jean Nouvel, and the first phase of the exhibition, the Grand Egyptian Museum in Giza. He designed projects in Lebanon, France, Canada, and Saudi Arabia. Recently, he won the 5th prize of the UNESCO International Competition for rebuilding Al Nouri Mosque in Mosul in Iraq. As photographer, he's put more than 30 solo exhibitions worldwide with themes mostly related to abstraction as well as vernacular architecture in West, North Africa and the Arab world. His latest exhibition named Old Cities in the Middle East at Paris Sorbonne University of Abu Dhabi in 2016 showed an amazing urban and architectural heritage under threat. He will be presenting today and really a hot and enthusiastic subject for us as students and teachers, professors. It's called New Approaches in Museum Design and Scenography. So scenography in museum is a holistic approach to the study, practice, and the coordination of all aspects relate to exhibition design, researching the storyline, creating scenic sequences, showcase, artcraft, and lighting and graphic media, and so on. I'm leaving to you now the intervention, please, Samir.
Thank you, Man. Good evening, everyone. Sorry for being late, technical problems. It's a pleasure to talk about museums. This has been my work for the last 16 years. Basically, I would like to show you quickly some of my work. As a designer, I designed projects in Lebanon, Canada, and Saudi Arabia. And I worked on some international competitions as well. But my work since 2004 relates to museums. 2004, I was in Qatar, and I applied to work with Qatar Petroleum, and because at that time the Emir of Qatar wanted to manage the state projects, museum state projects, and he called upon Qatar Petroleum to manage this project. And I was given the privilege of managing some key projects, Museum of Islamic Art to begin with IMP and Jean-Michel Wilmot, the Photography Museum with Calatrava, and the National Library with Arata Isozaki. You can see from left to right, a Museum of Islamic Art, Photography Museum, and a National Library, and down the National Museum with Jean Nouvel. Later on, in 2009, I moved to Abu Dhabi, and I was ACOM director of the Louvre Abu Dhabi, which I managed for 2 years. Then the SADDI projects were stopped for a while. I would like, this is my background on museums. I will come later to the museums in details, but first I would like to speak in general about the evolution of museum. What is a museum? Of course, if you open a dictionary, it says it's a building in which objects of historical, scientific, artistic, or cultural interest are stored and exhibited. But this definition is very simplistic. With the evolution of museums, the ICOM has defined a little bit more the notion of museum. It's a non-profit institution, of course, that acquires, conserves, research, communicates, and exhibits the tangible and intangible heritage of humanity, and for the purpose of education, study, and enjoyment. Also, this was not clear enough. Recently, there has been a wider definition of museums. They are basically, besides preserving, researching, interpreting, and exhibiting, they should enhance understandings of the world and aiming to contribute to human dignity and social justice, global equality, and planetary well-being. So we can see that the notion of a museum is becoming very, it's widening up to englobe a lot of elements which will make the museum a central part of our daily social life. If we go back from a historic point of view, the first museum was in Italy. The first time the word museum has been used, it's in the Medici collection in Florence, which has been exhibited. It was in the 15th century. And in London, the Ashmolean Museum is the first museum to be open to the public. So from that time, museum starts being an institution and not just collection of items, because we have to remember that museums has been the privilege of the aristocracy and kings. In the old time, they used to have a private spaces to show their collections, which they gained in wars and conquest and so on. So the notion of museum changed in the 19th century, and it's becoming a public institution. Here I would like to show some examples of museum architecture, which from the right, left to the right, we have classical buildings. We have in Berlin the National Museum, Mies van der Rohe. We have other museums by Louis Kahn, by I.M. Pei, and so on. So the architecture of museums have evolved drastically during the different periods of time. And of course, we have to remember that museums are very complex projects. So the architecture will not be fully understood if we don't see the interior of a museum. So there is a relationship between the volumes, the shape of the museum, and what's inside. We have to also remember that museums can impact a city. The most obvious example is the Guggenheim Museum, the Guggenheim Foundation. The first Guggenheim Museum was in New York by Frank Lloyd Wright. And at the end of the 20th century, there was another Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao done by Frank Gehry. And we can see that these two museums are the most visible museums either in New York or in Bilbao. In fact, the Guggenheim in Bilbao changed the whole city, which the city was unknown. And when the museum opened, 1 million visitors came the first year, and today it's an amazing institution. And of course, lately, there was a project to implement a Guggenheim Museum in Saadiyat in Abu Dhabi, but until today, it did not materialize. I think it's now under, they are considering building it very soon. And here I gathered some the most important museum on planet Earth, starting, of course, with the Louvre in Paris, the British Museum, and we have the Metropolitan Museum in New York, the Hermitage in St. Petersburg, and so on. And in Paris, of course, we have the Centre Pompidou, which is very well known. We have many other museums in different spots, countries or towns or cities. If we consider a museum as a project or as a, something which has to be planned, because planning a museum is not a simple project like planning a house or planning a factory or whatever. Because the museum has to care for people, it has to protect and exhibit an exhibition, and it has to be designed, fully designed, not only by architects, but also by architects and engineers, but also by a set of specialists. If we start with planning for people, today the notion of museum has evolved so much that people are really, the museums are really about people and communities. So the dimension of a museum is really, the real dimension of a museum is really when it takes into consideration the visitors, the kind of visitors or the communities that this museum is designed for. And here I put some key elements, keywords like visitor experience, wayfinding, audience research, enjoyment, learning, socializing, and experimenting. We can see from that people, as they are really, I mean, the visitor is really at the core of planning a museum, because what makes a museum successful is a successful visitor experience. And this visitor experience should lead to, or should provide enjoyment, and for young people as well as for adults, learning, discovery, also socializing and experimenting with different items, etc. But we don't have to forget that the basic aim of a museum from historic times is to host, protect, and exhibit artifacts and collections. So these artifacts and collections, they can vary depending on the theme. A museum can be an art museum, could be, when we say art, could be painting, sculpture, whatever, and it could be a science museum, it could be a history museum, and so on. So, and here again, we are talking about multidimensional aspects of a collection, how it will be exhibited, how it will speak to people, the role of curator or curators is very important, but also how the content will be revealed to the public, the scenography, the storytelling, and also all the range of tools that the team responsible for exhibition will put together to really make an exhibition successful and authentic. Last item, which is basically it's regarding the architecture and the engineering of a museum. And this is also a very critical item. Usually, the client or the community or the state, depending, we'll see later about this, they call for a competition or they appoint an architect. And this architect, of course, will be responsible to design a museum, but he will not, in general, he will not work alone. He will gather a team of engineers and specialized consultants to create really, to start with the concept and to develop the concept throughout the design. And the keywords here are the brief, which is fundamental. The architect will be given a brief. The architect and his team, of course, will be given a brief. And other words which are important: master planning, the different design stages from concept or data collection to tendering, etc. The cost and time, and recently there is a huge focus on sustainability. Now, I would like to speak a little bit about the architecture because, as I said before, an architect can design a museum, but he has to work with other teams. So the architecture of a museum is a shell, but this shell has to enclose a content, it has to enclose exhibition. So the shell and the content are not developed independently of each other, but together. So this is extremely important. Of course, we are all architects and we can design a museum, but we cannot design a museum from scratch. It has to be based on a brief, which is given to the architect by the curators, by the people who really are concerned about the theme and the storyline and what the museum how the museum should act in terms of being part of a city, of a community, etc. So architecture should express the content, and this is very important. We'll develop this later with examples. Sorry. But it's very important to remind everyone that an architect on his own cannot really design a museum. He has to work with a team of curator, exhibition designers, and specialists all together to come up with a good project. Now, the exhibition is something we have, which is at the heart of a museum. The basic finality of a museum is really to provide exhibition space for visitors. So exhibition projects can be based on different intentions and contents. It could be a classical collection like in the Louvre and the British Museum, where you have different sections. You have the Greek, the Roman, the classical, you have Mona Lisa and the Louvre painting, you have etc. So, but also all these exhibition, behind of all these exhibition, there is curators and there are exhibition designers. So a successful exhibition offers authentic and unmediated experiential spaces, telling fascinating stories in which arcane knowledge is made accessible to the visitor. When we speak about exhibition, the word that we should really have in mind is scenography. And this issue, this word of scenography has evolved drastically during the last 20 or 30 years, because scenography is about transforming the space and providing multidimensional layers to any theme. And this is really an amazing discipline where people can really discover multi-layer meanings to any theme or to any object. So narrative spaces create places where questions are asked, avenues of thought are explored, and stories are invented. From that, we can see the importance of really working on the three elements: the architecture, the exhibition, and the scenography. And this leads us to the content. A museum has to provide content. It has to create an exhibition or to develop an exhibition, of course, based on a content, but also addressing this content to a group of people. This group can range from children to adults. And this is also a dimension which adds to the complexity of designing an exhibition. Scenography in museums display design through storytelling. Storytelling is a very important element in a museum because at the end of the day, and this is where there has been an amazing evolution of the museum. In the old time, you go to a museum to see artifacts and showcases with some labels. Like if you go to the old Musée de l'Homme in Paris, you see elements coming from different countries in a showcase with some small explanations. And you have, it's about just encountering these elements. Today, things have been changed drastically because you can see the same objects, but there should be stories about these objects or an object. And the analysis of any object and its layers of meaning can create a lot of layers that will really work together to create what we call a museum experience. And this is a difference between the old museum as we knew it like 50 years ago, and today museums which are really about storytelling, about scenography. It's like in a theater, when you go to see a piece of theater, you have actors and you have a theme and you have a story. This storytelling has been really at the heart of the museum evolution, and we'll see it later. So museums are dramatic and dynamic spaces which contain many elements and narrative symbols in display to express design concept. Here we have a natural history museum, but there are stories which you can, which a visitor can follow on multimedia or on graphics, even with the music and so on. So it's a holistic experience. We can see here that scenography can translate content into accessible three-dimensional environments, producing a narrative space. So a space which in its totality can really tell a story. Like here we have this Natural History Museum in Denmark, and it's really speaking to everyone. And the aim of scenography is really to transform the visitor from a passive spectator, like it used to be in the old time, to an actor for the museum experience. So the visitor is really experiencing and living the experience, participating most of the time to the experience, also communicating with other visitors, discussing and so on. So there is a huge change in the way the museum is today active, and this is really very challenging. We can see from all this that it's not a unidimensional way of exhibiting. There are so many items you can put in play together to create this living experience. I worked on the Grand Egyptian Museum with Atelier Bruckner. They are based in Stuttgart, and of course, Professor Uwe Bruckner is the founder of Atelier Bruckner, and he changed a lot through his designs, and Atelier Bruckner designed the notion of a museum. So scenography is really a creative discipline to design space with like what you do in a theater or in a movie, but dealing, of course, with static elements to transform them into more dynamic, into more living stories. Again, in the same line of thought, the storytelling and communications through museum spaces, how the museum can explore a series of theatrical performances and scenography, and how the museum can motivate, participate, and interact so that the audience can really experience the display in a more living way. Of course, when we speak about storytelling, you have to create a story like in a movie. The same is happening now in museums. So from one static theme or object or a group of objects, you can create stories that will really tell something and open up perspectives that were not foreseen before. And the tools for scenography and for telling these stories or storytelling, there are many elements that can be used together to really achieve this experience. We will see later about these elements, but like here, you have an immersive environment, and it's really a new approach if we compare it with a static museum where you have showcases or you have all the graphics on a wall. So it's a living thing. The first item is, of course, the content. That's why the architecture of a museum cannot be done in isolation from what's in the museum, the content, and this is the basic element. So the start of any museum is really the outlining of a content, and content is the narrative of the exhibition, and this is very, very important. And of course, when you have a content, you need the space. So you need to work within a space, and you need maybe more than one space. You have a transition of spaces, and how the visitor will go from one space to another, and how he will experience the changes and the evolution of the theme or story. This is very, very important. So all this, we are speaking about the inside of museum, because the museum has from outside a certain configuration, elevations, facade. But when you go inside, the spaces are defined based on of course, here we are speaking about the exhibition spaces, because a museum also has an entrance, it has a lobby, a theater, amphitheater, it has a library, it has a boutique, and so on. But here we are speaking about the exhibition space, which can be permanent or can be temporary, depending on each museum. And the object is really the base or the alphabet of any exhibition. You can you can create an exhibition with objects, and you can multiply the objects to enhance a certain direction, a certain theme. The object is a medium that present itself in any museum, either to speak about a historical fact or a scientific element, etc., etc. And of course, the recipient is the visitor, how he will interact with the with all these elements, the objects, the space, the sequence of like going from one point to another, moving around the exhibition, sensing the light, the multimedia, also listening to music, and so on. And routing is very important in a museum, because people will enter an exhibition from one point and they will exit from another point. The routing could be linear and boring, but it can be also vivid. It can, the routing itself is a huge element in moving inside a museum, discovering an exhibition. So how to make the journey or the visit live, and how it can really speak to people and achieve its the goal of the exhibition designer and the curators and so on, and the team as per se. This is really very important and very challenging. So when we speak about a museum, we speak about many designers working together to create new concepts, including techniques and methods of narrative and storytelling. It's not a one-man show, and this is, I would like to really stress on that point, that building a museum is not it's not only the architect who can create a museum. He has to work with other designers. And later on, I will explain my experience with this. Here, the tools of scenography, we have basically 5 tools. We have the graphics. The graphic design is very important. It can be 2-dimensional, 3-dimensional. It will explain either by writing or by images or by whatever means, 2 or 3-dimensional, some aspect of the exhibition. The lighting is extremely important. I think this is, in general, lighting is important in architecture, but here in an exhibition, we can have natural light. In many art museums, natural light is used, but it's diffused through layers of screens, so it will not harm the artwork, painting or whatever. But usually museums rely on artificial light. And today, the evolution of lighting, LED lighting, is very important. So it can be a mix of both natural and artificial, but usually in many museums, artificial lighting is preferred because it gives a constant lighting, and you can modulate the lighting. Today with the technology, we have a very sophisticated lighting techniques. The sound is very important. Music, speech, vibrations, whatever. This is a new dimension that is added today in museums. And this dimension should also be considered in a design, in designing an exhibition. And of course, digital media design is extremely important, and some museums, as we will see later, are basically relying on this technique. When we say digital media design, we can include also projection and film. So in many traditional museums, when you enter a museum, you start seeing a movie. And then you go and see and visit the exhibition with showcases and labels. Today, all this is integrated. So it forms a complete integrated and solid part of an exhibition. So just to recap on what I said, the content, the object, the space, the recipient, and the routing. These are the elements which can make an exhibition successful or boring. Usually, the visitor experience can be very crucial in determining if an exhibition is successful. Today, we measure the time that every visitor, when he goes into an exhibition, the time that he spent on the exhibition from the time he starts to the time he quits the exhibition. And there are a lot of studies in any museums today, I mean, about this issue of how long the visitor will stay or the time he will spend on an exhibition. If the exhibition is boring, the time is very short, and vice versa. So how the exhibition speaks to people, how much a visitor will interact with the exhibition and together also with each other, how the children will discover a certain aspect of the exhibition, how they will see what is interesting for them, and at the same time, how the adults will appreciate something different. All these items are very important. And as I said before, the time that a visitor put or spend in an exhibition is in function, or it relates to how the scenography will transform the visitor from a passive spectator, just passing by, to an actor for the museum experience. And this is the future, how we can make people really not only enjoy, learn, but also being really part of the exhibition and exhilarated by its multiple components. We have a lot of strategies for staging. I will not dive into this. This is very specialized, but just to give you that we have so many ways of really making an exhibition living, and how it can speak to people, how it can dive into unforeseen aspect of any team, and how when you finish seeing this exhibition, you would like to come back or you would like to develop this on your own as a visitor. And this is extremely important. Now I will go back to the project I managed during 16 years. My first project when I started working on museums is I was in charge of the Museum of Islamic Art with IMPay. IMPay is one of the most renowned architects of the 20th century. He was the designer with Jean-Michel Wilmot of the extension of Louvre, Paris. And I think that many of you have seen the pyramid, but the pyramid is just what you see outside. But inside the Louvre in Paris, there has been a huge extension, and Pei and Jean-Michel Wilmot were in charge. So when the Emir of Qatar asked Pei to design the Museum of Islamic Art, at that time Qatar has put together a huge collection of Islamic art that they bought from different places. And one of the conditions that Pei put or asked the Emir to consider is that he will work with Jean-Michel Wilmot, the same team as when they worked on the Louvre. So this gives you an idea how much it is important that an architect works with an exhibition designer or an interior designer. It's not only about the interior design, it's about the exhibition. So this is what happened here. I was really privileged to work with Pei and Jean-Michel for almost 5 years on this project, from foundation to the opening of the museum, from 2004 April to December 2008. And that was roughly the last project of Pei outside China. His last project was in his hometown in China. And just to give you an idea about this project, it's not a huge project, but basically it has 4 floors of galleries, permanent and temporary galleries. It has all the components, auditorium, a huge atrium, amazing atrium with a sky dome. It has also, and this is Pei. He requested that he will select himself the site. And this is what he is been, the Emir of Qatar approved this, and Pei selected to put the water, the museum in the water, which was kind of risky because humidity is something in general you avoid in a museum. But there has been a huge study to really make this project as much as possible waterproof, and it's like a boat. And here we can have an idea about the components of this museum. 45,000 square meters, height 63 meters to the dome. So we had like 5,000 square meters of galleries, permanent, 700 temporary, etc. And what was interesting about this building, it has a research center. On the image, you can see it on the right side, with a huge library. So it was really an amazing project, and it gave me the opportunity to work closely with IMPA between Doha and New York. Another project I managed, but unfortunately it was not built, is the National Library. You can see it on the right side down. It's a huge structure designed by Arata Isuzaki. He was the pupil of Kenzo, discipline of Kenzo Tange. But unfortunately, this project, as well as the Qatar National Bank, which you see on the right top, they were not built. But nevertheless, the only project that was partly built was the villa of Sheikh Saud, who was like the Minister of Culture at that time. Another unlucky project, I worked on this for almost 2 years, is the Photography Museum. National Photography Museum was Santiago Calatrava. Also, this project was not built. The budget exceeded what the state of Qatar was aiming, although the Qatar has one of the biggest and finest photo collection in the world. But this project was not built. What I missed to tell you is that the National Library was built later, was in Qatar Foundation with Ramkulas. So instead of building the Qatar Library on the Corniche, it was built in Qatar Foundation by Ramkulas. So working with Calatrava was not easy, but this project was very important for Qatar, but it did not see the light, maybe one day. The last project I worked in Qatar was with the Jean Nouvel. It is the new National Museum. And this project has been developed by Jean Nouvel after the first project, which was an underground museum under the Palace of Al Thani, which was rejected by the Emir at a certain time. So Jean Nouvel came with this concept, and it has been built and opened in 2017, I guess. I worked with Jean on the first, until the schematic design on this project. It was a very challenging project. Now, when I was speaking about multimedia, the use of multimedia, if you have a good collection, can be limited to a certain aspect. But here, since the collection was very poor, some boats and some medals and so on, so Jean Nouvel used the multimedia extensively, and it was very expensive because he used high-end 8K or 5K projectors and so on, maybe 5K at the time. So, but this project is very successful, and it added to the museums of Qatar. Now, again, if I go back to Bilbao and to the Guggenheim in New York and how the Guggenheim Bilbao shaped the city, Qatar they were smart enough to to consider that building a museum can really put Qatar on the world map. And this is what happened. The Museum of IMP, the Museum of Islamic Art, as well as the Qatar National Museum, these two museums are really important for Qatar now, because people traveling to the Gulf, they come to Qatar mainly to see these two museums, besides some other museums, some other projects in Qatar Foundation. Now, in 2009, January 2009, I was appointed director of AECOM director of Louvre Abu Dhabi. I worked on this project with Jean Nouvel and Bureau Happold engineers, as well with Nathalie Crinière, exhibition designers, for 2 years and 3 months. This project was very challenging because Jean Nouvel designed a dome, which is, if I remember, 190-meter diameter dome, heavier than Eiffel Tower, to shield a space. Underneath this dome, you have 19 galleries and some other facilities, of course, like amphitheater and cafeterias and so on, in the water in Abu Dhabi. This was a huge undertaking because the dome was very heavy and it was supported only on 4 columns. So we worked very hard to resolve many issues. And what Jean Nouvel wanted in this project is really to create what he called a rain of light. Like when you are under the dome, the play of the light coming from different positions of the sun is really amazing. And but definitely, the dome is really to shield the galleries, which are on their own. I mean, they are closed galleries built in the water, and the dome is really to shelter all this. One project I was involved in, I was at that time working with Lord Cultural Resources in Canada, Toronto, was the King Abdulaziz Center for World Culture, $1 billion project, which was initiated by Aramco. And the designer was Noeta. An amazing project, also very complex, very challenging. But my role was mainly in the museum side of this project, because it's a big project. So we were concerned mainly with the galleries. And I managed the underground of Beirut National Museum and a small museum for Banque du Liban. It's a money museum. This project was designed in Cairo by Aratai Suzaki and Associates. It's a Museum of Egyptian Civilization, and I think it was, one gallery was opened last year by President of Egypt, Sisi. This project, this complex has five museums. And this is very interesting because there is a science, a space, Islamic, natural history museums, all on one site. It's, I think, one of the biggest museums in the world. And what was challenging in this museum is to devise different exhibitions in the same type of space. As you can see, the five museums have the same architecture, but inside every museum has to develop a different approach. Finally, to close my talk, this is in 2017, I worked for 1 year as exhibition manager on the Grand Egyptian Museum in Giza. And I was not involved with the architecture because it was underway. It was done by Henning and Peng. But I was managing the work of Atelier Bruckner on the phase 1, mainly the Tutankhamun galleries, 5,500 pieces of Tutankhamun discoveries, and the grand stairs and other parts of the project. This is an amazing project. It will be the biggest archaeological museum in the world when it will open, hopefully soon. Thank you very much for listening to me. If there is any questions, I'm available to answer.
Thank you so much, Samir, for this presentation.
My pleasure.
Okay, just you underline and outline some important element in the recent museum design. Like museum is really a point of impact and focus of the city. The example of Bilbao,
Right.
the visitor experience, how the now visitor experience is not only a spectator, it moves from spectator to an active that enjoy and learn from the museum.
Mm-hmm.
So the storing and the exhibiting of the artifact is very important. And yeah, the scenography is how the content of the museum was revealed to the people, to the visitors.
Right.
Yes. Then the several parameters regarding to the content aspects and objects, which are very important for the museum, making the visitor stands more in the museum, not feel themselves boring. Okay.
Right.
Thank you so much. I was really surprised by the diameter of the dome in Louvre Abu Dhabi, and about the size and the weight of it. You said it's heavier than Eiffel Tower.
Yeah, that's what I I heard. I'm
Yeah.
not sure, but let's say it's the biggest dome ever done.
Yes, 90 meters is a really very, very big dome.
Exactly.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So if there are any questions from the audience, maybe we can see the hands up. Okay, Sinem Hocam, please.
Thank you for this valuable presentation, firstly. I have two questions. As you said, there are drastic changes in museum designs with the help of today's technology.
Right.
And museum spaces, exhibitions can be more interactive. Visitors can be more active than ever. For instance, VR technologies can be integrated. Sensors can respond to users' visits. The exhibited things can be updated with the real-time data, etc. And my question is about the role of architects in integrating these technologies in their designs, how they can integrate these concepts, especially in early stages of design, or in other terms, in their storytelling. I have a second question. I'm giving Architectural Design 6, which is the graduation project, and our students are also in here. The project topic given to them is the design of science museum. This falls in a specific category among museum types. And would you have specific recommendations for our students in their designs of science museums?
Thank you for the two questions. Let me answer the first one. The role of architect is very important, of course. But as I mentioned, from my experience with Jean Nouvel on the Louvre Abu Dhabi, Jean Nouvel did the dome. I mean, he put the concept of the 19 galleries under a dome. But the designer who was involved in the exhibition of the 19 galleries was not Jean, but it was like a collaboration between Jean and a lady, Nathalie Crinière. But this collaboration was not very successful. Then Jean Nouvel had to bring another exhibition designer. I'm saying this to tell you that it's not easy to manage to have a good team from the beginning. The team that was done in Qatar between IMP and Jean-Michel Wilmot, although the project was more classical in this term, was more successful because they worked already in the Louvre, Paris. So to answer your question, I would say that all depends on how the architect the collaboration between the architect and the exhibition designer, how together they will work hand in hand, and they will solve the problems in terms of interfacing between the exhibition and the building. And this is a very tricky aspect of any museums. It's like in a hospital, how to interface between the medical and the building. But I would say more complex in a museum because you have the technology that is embedded in the exhibition, how it will impact the architecture, and also you have a lot of spaces like storage, quality of storage, quality of the environmental control of the collection. So you have very complex issues. And of course, the multimedia also is very important, and how the flow of technology will be mastered by both the specialist working with the exhibition designer and also the architecture and the engineers. All these aspects were in every museum project, they are really problematic and they have to be resolved. The second question regarding the Science Museum, I did not work personally on a science museum, although I was involved in reviewing some science museums, mainly in Aramco and old science museums and other places. The same issue is regarding the Science Museum, how you can present something very complex in a simple way. Like if you go to the London Science Museum in London or the Space Museum in Kuwait, how you present a lunar module in a simple way, although it's a very like space shuttle or an airplane, how you explain, or how you explain some scientific discoveries and so on. So all this, I go back to this storytelling and how you can, from one theme, you can develop many layers that will really make people enjoy and discover, and also come up with good understanding of the issue.
Thank you very much for your answer.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions?
Maan Hojam, may I make a little contribution?
Please,
Sure,
Hojam.
of course.
Please, Hojam, go ahead.
Okay, thanks a lot, Mr. SADDI. In my readings, in my new readings, I have come across with something saying that theaters, museums, and libraries, they are the new secular places of worship. When I first read it, I found it a bit exaggerated, but when I think about it, it is right. What do you think? Secular places of worship. For example, let me not go to the Middle East, but Bilbao. If Bilbao had another cathedral or a big church, would it do better than Guggenheim? What do you think?
It's a good question because, yeah, I mean, if you in the same line of thinking, how many people will be more looking at Apple products than, for instance, going to a church or a mosque? And this was an article somewhere I heard about this aspect of. I don't think. I mean, worship is a big word for a museum. You go to Bilbao for 2-3 days, and when you leave Bilbao, you will remember seeing such artist or such exhibition. It's not the same experience. But if we are speaking about the number of people going there, yes, I agree that if you calculate worship as like 1 million people went to Bilbao instead of 10,000 people went to a church or a mosque in this town or that town where there is a museum, numbers will give you maybe I would say a different answer. You see what I mean?
Yeah. I also find it very interesting. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the explanation.
Thank you for the question. Very good question.
We have a question from one of our students. I will read her question from the chat. Begüm Büşra Baş is asking, how did you start working in Qatar? Is there any advice for new graduate students for working or applying abroad? Also, how did you start designing museums? Can you tell us about your early career? Three connected questions, actually.
Yeah. Thank you for the question. In fact, I designed a lot of typologies like housing, commercial, but hospital in my life as designers, but never a museum. But to be honest, when I was a student and later on, I was fascinated by 3 architects, IMP, Calatrava, and Isozaki. When I immigrated to Canada, the first project I went to discover is the Walt Disney headquarters in Florida, designed by Isozaki. I was fascinated by the Louvre in Paris, designed by Pei, and by Calatrava as an engineer who did amazing structures. And in fact, I was working in Qatar with a small firm, local firm. And when I heard that there are these big projects, museum projects in Qatar, which I read it in the newspaper, that the Emir has given Qatar Petroleum the task of managing these projects. I thought, why not try my luck, you know? And I applied to QP. Fortunately, I was the only architect who applied. QP is mainly a lot of structural and chemical engineers. So I was interviewed, and after a couple of months, I was given the three projects that I was always dreaming to work. With three architects: Pei, Calatrava, and Isozaki. It was my luck, but I have to clarify that I did not design museums, but I managed these museums. And also I was trying as an architect to improve not only on the design, but also to make sure that the cost of designing and building this museum falls within the budget that was allocated. And I had a very successful work collaboration with Pei, because there have been some changes which he accepted, and vice versa, there has been an exchange of changes which he requested. So it was a good collaboration. Unfortunately, the two other projects were cancelled, but it was an amazing collaboration.
Thank you for the answer.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions or any other contributions? Actually, I have one question about your, let's say, opinion for the future after this pandemic. You know, the museums or cultural spaces are the places that are affected very much from the pandemic. How do you see the future?
I mean, the future is already there, because even before the pandemic, there has been many attempts to build digital museums. I mean, you sit in your home and you can visit an exhibition. But, and this has developed a lot. I was always keen on following up on these aspects of museum or exhibition, digital or virtual exhibition, where you have technology, high-end technology used really to feel that you are in a real museum. And of course, this will continue developing. But I hope that this will not stop real museums from functioning, because we have to remember that a museum relies on public funding, and public and private funding. So if the museum will not be funded properly, it will close. And one of the key element of a museum to continue functioning is to have visitors. So this is a really tricky situation where maybe people will not go often to a museum, and this will impact the functionality of these museums, especially in the States and Canada, where I live. But I think museum will stay as institutions that provide education, enjoyment, and learning and so on. But definitely at a certain moment, there will be a fierce competition between staying at home and visiting a museum, or taking the bus in a city and going to the British or the Louvre. But up till now, I'm hearing that big museums are still I mean, they are not suffering much from this. I hope I answered your question.
Yes, thank you. And I hope that too, that the museums will survive.
Inshallah.
Inshallah. Any other questions?
Yes, I have a very, very small question. It's already mentioned. Thank you for the presentation first, Mr. SADDI. Me personally also worked for a small museum project, a very small museum, local museum project, where the duty was given to the architect to arrange the interior architecture. But also the architect in that case had also the possibility to integrate, to decide what is to exponate. That means what is to show, which items are going to be shown in a museum. But in big scale projects, I can imagine, is there always a fixed list, or is it just, how can I say, being completed during the design project plus the creator projects and so on? How is it?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. It's not a small.
Excuse me.
No, I will answer as much as I. I mean, you have two scenarios. Either you have a building where you put an exhibition, or you create a building based on a collection or a set of artifacts. So in each case, you have a different scenario. Now, of course, you can start putting an exhibition with a limited number of items. Like I take an example, you can start doing a Museum of Islamic Art with maybe 200 elements, but this can grow over time. So in any museum, you have to consider extension, for future expansion of space. And this is very important because a museum is never, you cannot say, of course, if you have a limited collection, you can have a limited space. And if you have a limited budget, this will determine the space. But always consider expansion as something vital and important. Now, architects can design very nice spaces, but they have to also work with specialists to really. And this is here I can highlight the role of curator. A curator is very important in the equation of building an exhibition. You see what I mean? I don't think an architect can be a curator. A curator has more knowledge of a collection. Probably curators spend their life working on paintings or whatever objects, whatever artifacts. So this collaboration is very important. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I think we don't have any more questions. Thank you very much for this presentation. Maan Hocam, would you like to have a word before you finish?
Thank you. Yeah, as I finish, thank you for your presentation. It was for me, it was has clarified some ambiguous points about the museum interior displays of objects, and how we can deal with the variety of spaces, multimedias, and technologies. And especially the last question about the collaboration with the curator, because you're right, architect can design nice places, but when we design spaces for specific collections, then we have to work with those curators who are specialists in the questions.
Right.
Okay, this is what. Thank you again for the for this nice presentation. Sure.
My pleasure, man. And any future question, I'm available on internet, on email. I will be happy also to, if there is any projects you need me to have a kind of review, I'm available. Okay.
Yeah, many thanks for that. Again, many thanks for this very nice presentation. It has been great having you here. And I want to remind you about a small tradition we have. At our Faculty of Architecture and Design, we make some small donations in our guests' names. So today a donation has been made in your name to SAY Foundation, which works for equality in education.
Okay.
So that will be a kind of a small reminder of this day for you too, I hope. Again, many thanks for all your time and effort. We hope to see you again sometime.
Yeah, inshallah. One last item. I would like to say that the Islamic Museum of Islamic Art in Qatar was built by a Turkish company called Baytur Inşaat. I worked 5 years with these people and they did an amazing work. So I think Turkey should be proud of having contributed to this amazing project. Okay, I forgot to mention this.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks also to all our students and faculty members and guests. I think that will be it for today. We hope to see you again.
See you again.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.